Ready? At this time, the mayor will call the meeting to order on 6 p.m. Tuesday, January 7th of 2023. City Council Chambers, 201 East Nash Street, Terrell, Texas. We have with us in the chambers District 2, Grady Simpson, District 3, May Ronnie Velazquez, Mayor Pro Tem, District 4, Stephanie Holmes Thomas, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem, and District 5, Andrea Reese. This time we will stand for invocation. If you would please remain standing for the pledge. And Grady, would you mind leading us in our invocation?
Yes, Mayor. May we bow our heads, please. Our Father God, we give you thanks for this day. We thank you for bringing us through the adversities of COVID. We ask that you will give us wisdom and show us how we need to move forward with our future, individually, community-wise, as well as with our great state of Texas. We give you thanks and all praise. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
All right. Next on the agenda is mayor and council community recognitions and events. I do want to say thank you to all of those who attended Kaufman County Day in Austin, Texas yesterday. It's put on by the KCLC. That is the Kaufman County Leadership Council. It's made up of mayors and city managers from 9 cities in Kaufman County, 5 Chamber of Commerce chairmen of the board and chamber executives, 7 school board superintendents, and 7 presidents of the school board of trustees, 6 EDC board presidents and their CEOs, plus all utilities represented in the county. So we had a really good turnout, good visit. I would like to brag a little bit as mayor from the city of Terrell that no other community had all of its members there. So thank you, council members, for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend Kaufman County Day. And it gives us an opportunity to speak with legislatures and those who are making decisions on funding for our community. And I think we'll reap some really good benefits as we move forward. In addition to that, I wanted to, at our meeting, say something related to our sesquicentennial and the city's 150th birthday, either by acknowledging a date or individual. Tonight, I would like to honor or state a fact. On this date in 1891, Dr. David Richard D.R. Wallace served his final day as the first superintendent of the Terrell State Hospital. A native of North Carolina, Dr. Wallace attended schools in Greenville before continuing his education at New York City Medical College. He practiced in North Carolina before moving to Texas, where he went into practice with another doctor in Waco and taught Latin and Greek at Baylor. He then reported to the 15th Texas Regiment as a surgeon and served throughout the Civil War. After the war, he resumed his medical practice before being appointed as superintendent of Austin State Hospital, where he served from 1874 until 1879. In 1883, he was appointed to help establish what is now known as Terrell State Hospital, the second hospital of its kind in the state of Texas. He believed that the insane should not be hidden away, but should be treated for their illness. In this respect, Dr. Wallace was a pioneer in the psychiatric field in Texas. So that's my little tidbit. Does anybody have anything that they would like to recognize?
I'd like to recognize a centenarian that's turned 103 yesterday, Mrs. Lily Marie White. She's been in the community a long, long time. If my mother would have lived, she would have been 90, and she even did my mom's hair. So She was very skilled. She really loved fashion and people. But her birthday was February 6, 1920. So I'd like for the council and the community to know that and help us celebrate that and just wish her a belated birthday. And I'm sure we'll be doing something by maybe proclamation or something as I reach out to the family and get that confirmed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilwoman. Anyone else?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to take the time to recognize former coach of Little League football, David Wells, who passed away. We had his funeral on Saturday, and he coached in Little League football for over 35 years. And they all started in the 60s, and they started with the intent on giving something for our youth, and man, did they give a lot. He and JC went to battle many days with their teams, but he's coached the mayor, his class, and people all the way up for over 40 years, and did such a great job. But we had a great loss, had an amazing funeral on Saturday, so just want to take the time to recognize Mr. Coach David Wells, for his accomplishments, and much condolences to his family.
Well, I just wanted to talk about an upcoming event we have, the Kiwanis Pancake Day on February 21st. It's all day, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. The funds they raise from this go to help children all over the world, but we especially focus in on our local kids in the community, helping them in a bunch of different ways. And plus it's yummy pancakes and sausage, and it's $10. You can get a ticket at the door.
Where is it?
It's going to be at Rockwall Bryn Church of Christ.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So we are going to recognize a little bit later, if the council doesn't mind, I'm going to hold off on some young athletes that we would like to recognize. We'll continue with our meeting, and then when their coach arrives, then we'll move to it. Next item on the agenda is adoption of the minutes. Item number 6, discuss and consider minutes from the regular city council meeting on January 24th of 2023. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the regular city council meeting minutes from January 24th, 2023 as presented.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Mayor Ronnie Velasquez, Mayor Pro Tem District 3, a second from Andrea Reese, District 5, to approve the minutes of the meeting as presented. Is there any other comments? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous vote of those present. Our next item on the agenda, did we have any remarks from visitors? Okay.
I'm sorry,
Okay. Next item on the agenda is boards and commissions. Item 7.1, discuss and consider Animal Shelter Advisory Committee Ordinance number 2955. This is our City Secretary, Don Stahl.
Mayor and Council, we discussed ordinance number 2955 last week. It's regarding the Animal Control Advisory Committee. The only changes on this, instead of 4 members, now it will have 5 members, the 5th member being a resident of Terrell, and they will meet at least 3 times a year. Okay. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Council, we reviewed this on a couple of occasions. I think we've been briefed on it. So does anybody have any new questions or comments for Ms. Stahl? Hearing none, is there a motion on 7.1, ordinance number 2955?
Yes, Mayor. May I make a motion that we approve ordinance 2955?
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Grady Simpson, District 2, a second from Andrea Reese, District 5, to approve ordinance number 2955 as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous consent of those present. Our next item on the agenda is 7.2, discuss and consider Library Advisory Board appointments. This again is Don Stahl.
Mayor and Council, the Library Advisory Board roster is in your packet. Joe Perry and Cindy Oakley both need to be replaced, And we have applications in the packet for Angie Cooper and Shantavia Cheeves, and this falls under the oversight of Stephanie Holmes Thomas.
All right. Councilwoman Thomas, do you have any recommendations for the council to consider?
Yes, I reached out to both of these ladies, and they were very eager and ready to start with this appointment. So I would like to make a recommendation that we appoint Mrs. Cheeves and also Mrs. Cooper.
Is that in the form of a motion,
It can be, yes. I make a motion that we appoint Angie Cooper and Ms. Shantavia Cheeves to the library board.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Stephanie Holmes Thomas, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem District 4, and a second from Mayrani Velazquez, Mayor Pro Tem District 2, to appoint 2 members to the advisory board. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our next item on the agenda is 7.3, discuss and consider zoning board of adjustments reappointment. This is our city secretary, Don Stahl.
Mayor and council, on the zoning board of adjustments, Matthew Hancock and Ashley Carmona Five Coats terms expire in February of '23. And Carolyn Fairley also needs to be replaced on this board. She's moved out of town. We do have 2 applications that were put in the packet later, actually today. Gary Eubanks and Daniel Hamilton. This falls under the oversight of Andrea Reese, and I think you probably haven't had time to review those. So,
I would like to make a motion to postpone this item.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Andrea Reese, District 5, and a second from Grady Simpson, District 2, to postpone item 7.3. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous vote of those present. Our next item on the agenda is 7.4, discuss and consider planning and zoning board reappointment. Again, City Secretary Don Stahl.
Mayor and council, Gabriel Cabrera's term is up in February of '23 on the Planning and Zoning Commission. He does wish to be reappointed, and his email is in the packet, and this falls under the oversight of Mayrani Velazquez.
Councilwoman Velazquez, do you have a motion?
Yes, motion to reappoint Gabriel Cabrera as a board member to Zoning and Planning Commission.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Mayrani Velazquez, Mayor Pro Tem District 3, to appoint, and I can't get the name as well as you do, Javier, right? And second by Grady Simpson, District 2. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous consent of those present. Next item on the agenda is 8.1, discuss city credit rating. This is going to be handled by Jason Hughes or Hilltop Securities. I saw him walk in just a few minutes ago. Come on in. Welcome.
Mayor and council, good evening.
Jason looks a little wet. It must be raining outside, isn't it?
I brought the rain with me, so. Mayor
I
and
want to
council,
report, by the way, that I can confirm that Jason drove safely here and was not speeding and communicated ahead of time that he was being delayed. So thank you for coming in adverse circumstances, sir. We appreciate it.
well, thank you. Good to be here again. So, Mayor and council, what was just handed out to you by Dawn is exactly what is on the screen, and I'll go through. What this is meant to be is just a high-level introduction to your credit ratings. And so the nice thing is you have a lot of positive things that are going on here in Terrell. And I'll kind of jump ahead a little bit. Mr. Sims may have told you, but Moody's is actually looking at your credit rating, and it could be upgraded. We don't know that yet, so that would certainly be something nice. But what I'll do is I'll go through what credit ratings are, what funnels into that, And then I'll talk to some about the history of your credit ratings, and then I'll wrap up with how you compare against some of your peers as well as the averages. So certainly while I'm going through this, feel free to jump in, ask me any questions you may have. So there's three major credit rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P. You use two of those, S&P and Moody's, and most recently you've actually only used S&P simply because that's all you've had to use. A lot of times one of the things that we're doing is if you're going to issue bonds, COs, or certificates of obligation, we look at it, and depending on the size, we may not need two credit ratings. We may only need one. So, and as you can see there, S&P, that is a AA- is what your credit rating is with them. And then Moody's is actually an A1. So AA- and an A1. Now, a couple of things. What a credit rating is, as you can see there, is opinion about the relative risk and potential for default. Basically, your ability to repay your debt in a timely or on a timely basis. So that's what a credit rating is. It is not a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold that security. So first and foremost. The other thing it is not advice on how to run your city. So that's one of the things. I've had clients before who have tried to, whether we were in rating meetings or on phone calls, ask, well, what if we did this, or what do you think about this? And the rating agencies are very careful to not give any kind of advice and basically just say, based on our metrics, this is where you fall out. So as far as characteristics of credit ratings, you can have credit ratings that are both long-term and short-term, or for long-term and short-term obligations. The city only has long-term debt outstanding, so that's what I'll be focused on. One of the things, I'm actually going to skip to the next page because this really kind of goes over the written part on slide 2. This is the rating process, and so this lays out pretty well how we go through determining if we need a credit rating and then going and asking for one. So we basically apply for a credit rating. We have, whether it's Moody's or S&P, they assign their analytical team. We provide them information that's usually in the form of the preliminary official statement, which is simply the offering document for the debt that we're issuing. The one thing I will tell you, the next one's out of place. I apologize for that. So it's provision of information, then it goes to the analysis. So your analyst is looking at the information that we provide to them. It's not only the analyst that's involved, but their credit committee as well. So they'll go through, they'll do their analysis. They have the management meeting. That's when they really go to the rating committee. They assign the credit rating. They convey to you, the city, what that credit rating is, and then they'll send that out to the market. So that's kind of the steps that occur. The other thing is, it's not only at the point in which we issue debt, but later on they have what they call surveillance. And so what they're trying to do is make sure that they keep that credit rating fresh, if you will, and use information from your most recent audits, for example, to give that to investors. They don't want it to be stale whenever those investors are using that to make a rating decision, or beg your pardon, an investment decision on your bonds. There we go. A couple of things that we always recommend is anytime the rating agency wants to talk to you, for instance, in a surveillance time period, we always want to make sure that we get back to them in a timely manner, because the rating agencies can actually withdraw your credit rating if they don't get timely information from you or get the information that they're asking for. That hasn't happened at the city, so that's good news, but we always want to make sure that they have that. And so a lot of things, what they're looking for, last audited financial statements. They may ask for a questionnaire, so they have kind of standard questions that they typically pose for a city to go through and get to their credit rating. And then, like I said, they can suspend that rating if they don't have that information. One of the other things too, you see that last bullet point, a lot of times the nice thing is having that opportunity, whether it's to meet them in person or to talk to them via conference call, gives you the ability to provide context, right? There may be a situation in which your general fund revenues have come down. There may be a situation in which your sales tax revenues have gone up. And just being able to talk to them and explain that's very helpful. Because if you think about it, those analysts are looking at multiple cities, multiple entities on a day-to-day basis. So just having that opportunity to explain to them, this is Terrell, Texas, this is what's going on, certainly helps there. So one of the things too that you'll see is over time, there's different things that become important to them. And usually those are driven by what's going on in the market right now. For example, cybersecurity is a big one. And I can tell you, I've had a city out in East Texas where they were hacked. They lost all their financial data. And certainly it was something that was being asked even before. This city was not why they started asking that, but just as an example, they're very interested in how you protect your data and what you're doing. So just as an example, extreme weather events, right? As we had, and we've had so many different ice storms now, I forget the names, but the different ice storms and everything that's happened, how you're able to make it through that, what impacts you've had, especially from a financial sense. So those are different things that they're looking at. And then one of the things that they're actually looking at now is your OPEB funding. The market, generally speaking, was down last year, right? Roughly 20% or so. Obviously, when the market's down, typically you don't have, obviously, the same returns that you would for your OPEB or your pension. So that's certainly something that they're looking at. And actually, one of the things I would point out too, you may remember, I think it was roughly about 18 months ago, council passed a series of plans, a long-term financial plan, which really deals with the M&O side of the equation, a capital plan, which deals with the INS side of the equation. And
I would say that's non-controversial.
Councilwoman,
Woman,
Reese, Councilwoman Reese.
Mr. Reese.
What? Yeah.
Mr. Reese.
Hey, Brady's talking to you.
You trying to tell him to behave,
Yeah.
chambers, behave
I
in
went over there and
chambers,
he
behave
was
in
like, gonna
chambers.
kiss me. I was like, you can't kiss
I
Councilwoman.
really wanted to have, sit down some.
That was
Not in the chambers.
I thought it would be in
You
All right,
got him to go.
yeah, we'll do that. Okay. We're gonna reconvene into a regular city council meeting. Again, we have, Jason Hughes with Hilltop Securities, doing presentation. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. Mayor and council, on page 5 or slide 5, right before the power went out, I think one of the things I was talking about is what you had passed roughly 18 months ago. It's admittedly skewed because City of Houston carries a AA credit rating. And so that obviously skews that much, much higher, but we wanted to go ahead and leave that in, so we showed the complete picture. So one thing that on slide 14, that S&P looks at is the diversification of your tax base. And so you see this as top 10 taxpayers as a percentage of total assessed value. And once again, with those median ratios being on the left-hand side. On slide 15, the median family income, and this is shown as it's compared to both the state and the national average. The per capita market value wealth is on slide 16. And as you can see there, Terrell fully kind of in line with the AA and a little bit higher than the AA minus peers. On slide 17, this goes into general fund revenues, which falls in the finance category. And again, that's 30% of that overall credit rating for S&P. Once again, you see there that AA much higher because of Houston and the size of their general fund revenues and their general fund revenue budget. But as you can see, City of Terrell, right in line pretty much with that AA minus peer municipalities immediately to the left. General fund balance as a percentage of revenues is on slide 18. This is one area that you're a little bit lower than those AA minus peer municipalities as well as some of your other peer cities. Again, that's only one component though within the financial component unit. On slide 19, direct net debt as a percentage of full value, again, pretty much in line with that AA minus for your peer municipalities. And then finally on slide 20, direct net debt per capita. And so as you can see there, once again, pretty much in line with that AA minus and really the AA, all the AA categories. So if you turn to slide 21 and 22, so this is really just the backup information for all of those graphs that I just went through. And so you can see there it's split out into the economic, or what factors into the economic metrics, the tax base, the financial, the debt, and again, the pension and OPEB. One thing I would point out too, if you're bored and you go home tonight and you're trying to back into some of these numbers, S&P uses their own numbers. And so yes, they will go to your audit. Yes, they will pull information from your audit, from your budget. But for instance, on some of the things for pension and OPEB, what you may be reporting or what your actuary may be reporting as your rate of return, they may discount that, right? And they may come back and say, well, it's not 8%, we believe it to be 6%. Moody's in particular has what they call a tread water calculation where they apply a lot of their own assumptions to that. So I say that within the context of I have had cities say, well, this isn't right, this doesn't match our audit, and it's not always going to match that audit because of that. So the nice thing is your credit rating has certainly come a long ways, and it wasn't in a bad spot to begin with, but it's come a long ways into that AA category. And hopefully Moody's, whenever they get back to us, we'll see an upgrade from them as well. If Moody's does upgrade one notch, then you would be on par, they would be on par with S&P. So very happy with that. Certainly the things that are going on now, and Mr. Sims was on the call with Moody's, he did a very good job of basically kind of giving them an overview of everything that's going on in Terrell. And so the hope would be, again, that they raise that credit rating up. And again, that helps save money whenever we go to issue debt for your citizens. So I know I went through that very quickly, but I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have or to add any more detail.
No, Jason, thank you for that great presentation. I just have one question. On the schedule conference and the call meeting with these rating agencies, Mike, do we do this on a regular basis? How often should we do it?
So Two things. Two times you typically see a credit rating is whenever we are actually going out to issue debt. And so we have simply had conference calls most recently. A lot of the rating agencies still are under COVID protocols and they're not meeting in person. So we request a credit rating if we're going out for an open market issue or if we have the surveillance. So it's typically, to answer your question, Mayor, when we are getting ready to issue debt.
Got it, okay. And we've done a good job doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, so Mayor, I just kind of underline what Jason just said there. So the most recent credit rating analysis have been associated with us issuing debt on the utility side, right? And so there's a very standardized methodology for us to do that. We work with our rate consultant. We make sure that our rates can handle the debt that we're putting on it. So we're not even going to the rating agencies until we've analyzed our water rates and our wastewater rates to make sure that they can handle those additional costs. Not every city does that, but that's a great practice that we have because you want to be able to say, yeah, we've thought this through and this is an affordable thing under the rates that our utility payers are doing. The other thing I would say to fill in a little blank there is remember, we update our 10-year capital plan on a regular basis, and as I've mentioned to you before, you'll be spending part of the spring analyzing your 10-year capital plan, and you'll have opportunity to make some decisions there about whether or not in FY24 we might want to issue any debt on the general fund side. We didn't do that in FY22. We decided not to do that in FY23. But I would say FY24 is a year where we'll look at our 10-year capital plan and make some decisions about whether or not we want to have general fund debt issuance. And then Jason will participate again. Jason will help us do some of those analysis, and we'll end up being back with those rating agencies sometime in FY24.
Okay, good.
Yes, Jason.
Yes, sir.
Your mic on, Grady?
It's on?
Okay,
Yep. Maybe I need to get closer.
there you
Sorry.
go. Now I hear you.
All right, here we go. Question, I'm gonna try to make sense of this the best I can. City of Corsicana, I think their population is larger than ours, right? So I just kind of want to know, what are the few numbers that you can look at on these financials to really determine comparisons of cities in terms of how you're doing? Well, how do you compare pound per pound with those cities if you don't have the population and numbers? What are some of the few numbers you can look at and say, okay, well, this kind of gives me a better view of where we are against a city that has bigger population?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. One of the things, if you think about the four main credit rating categories, again, economy, finance, debt and pension, and management. The economy, generally speaking, you can't really directly impact that, right? You can, as a council, you can certainly try to bring business in, you can do things like that, but generally speaking, you're going to have people who are moving here, whether it's home prices, whether it's jobs, things are there outside of your control. The things that you can control are general fund, right? Whether that's through raising revenues, whether that's building up a fund balance, things like that. So those are the items. Your management policies, again, one of the things Mr. Sims just mentioned is the 10-year capital plan. The credit rating agencies really, really like to see that now. And that's certainly something that over probably the last 5 to 8 years, they've become more in tune with, which is making sure that things are, again, in policy, that they're codified, that they're reviewed on an annual basis by council, right? So those are type things. And then that last one is your debt. A lot of times, yes, you can control your debt, but your debt is a precursor to growth in many cases, right? Because you have to put in the infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, drainage, roads, what have you. So the finances is really the area that you probably have the most control over in some ways. Again, as far as direct comparisons, if you look at slide 21, this shows, for instance, a lot of the same information that S&P is looking at. And you see kind of on the middle to right-hand side, City of Terrell, and then you have their City of Corsicana, City of Ennis. So that gives you just a very general idea of some of the statistics and metrics, if you will.
What about a city's total assessed value compared to others?
So total assessed value, one of the things, Moody's in particular, that used to be a big thing with them of, well, I had clients in the past of them say, you're not big enough. Your tax base isn't big enough. City of Coppell, for instance, was not a AAA city because their tax base was not big enough. Now, this goes back to 12.
Now, that's the answer I'm looking for, something like that.
But that is something that Moody's has actually gone through and said, okay, we recognize now that just the sheer volume or size of your tax base doesn't necessarily make you a AAA city, right? So they try to look at other things related and linked into that. Again, one of the things that they look at from a general economy standpoint is your home buying power, and that kind of beg your pardon, looks at your wealth levels, if you will. So there's certain things that play into it that make it where that just the general size is not as important as it used to be.
It makes sense? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Quick questions, go ahead.
And Jason, as we're looking at the data, whether it's on the graphs or the peer median comparisons, and looking at all the numbers for the city of Terrell, which looking at the numbers, they're pretty they seem to be either in range with the AA negative or kind of in the middle of AA negative or the typical AA, the average rating. So it seems like, just from looking at the numbers, there is that opportunity to upgrade.
Right.
And if we don't upgrade, correct me if I'm wrong in my assessment here, but what you're saying is we can take a look at the factors that we can control, whether it's, you're trying to bring business and like for your general fund revenues, if we want to take that from 26,631 million, then bringing it over to as close as we can to that 94, almost 95 million average that an AA would typically have.
When again, remember Houston's in there, so if you take Houston out, so it's not going to be, they're not going to look at that and say, okay, our AA is 95 million, so that's what Terrell has to get to. They're going to look at those peers. I did include, I think this is just Texas here, but they're actually looking on a national scope. One of the things that they want to try to do is to make sure that your AA minus credit rating is the same as a AA minus credit rating in Oregon, as a AA minus credit rating in Maine, or that they're all comparable. So it's not simply hitting a number and they say, okay, well, you've hit this number, you've flipped the switch, so to speak, right? So you're due for an upgrade, but it's, again, going through and looking at those metrics.
Okay. And so, your relationship, Hilltop Securities, the relationship that you have with the city or contractual services, are you able to provide, very specific guidance, whether it's in terms of policies or for your, attracting specific type of business, or, trying to get your revenues to a certain dollar amount as possible, or specific policies that the council can implement?
Absolutely, and so two things. One, there's a gentleman, Ted Chapman, who works with us. He is actually our internal credit analyst. He was at S&P for approximately 20 years. We thankfully were able to hire him away, so he's the one that, and he helped with this presentation, but has his ear to the ground, and a lot of times I go into his office, say, what can we improve? One of the things, again, going back to 2021, if you remember, we had the very large, for Terrell, very large CO issuance. We also issued some GO refunding bonds. And one of the things in talking with Mr. Sims is, I said, one of the things they're paying attention to is, again, the management aspect and the policies. And again, that's when we put in place long-term policies, because that does kind of help strengthen the credit rating, right? And as we knew that for, again, the city, we were taking on a relatively large amount, we wanted to make sure that we had done everything we could to make sure that that rating stayed, at least at a minimum, stayed at where it was. And then I think we've set it up for the future as far as hopefully increasing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if I missed this or not. What did you say your recommendation for us to have a higher rating?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily a recommendation for a higher rating. I think what is generally natural is that you would gravitate towards a higher rating. And when I say that, that's, again, keeping a strong general fund, a strong financial profile. That's typically seeing growth in your taxable values. That's seeing the ability to manage your debt needs, knowing that you do have growth coming. So there's a number of things, and it's, again, generally natural that you see that to where if those things happen, and if you continue to run yourself financially prudent, that you would see that gravitation higher towards hopefully a AAA credit rating at some point in the future.
And is it normal to use a city like Houston if it skews the numbers so badly? Is that pretty standard?
Well, it is one of those things, I hate to kind of cherry pick and take entities out. In this case, it might have made more sense to go ahead and take them out just because it is such a large city. I do think it says something, though, if you sit and think about it, if you think about Houston, with their tax base, with their general fund revenues, is one credit notch above you. So to me, that kind of says something that's, again, it's not just those things, it's everything else that goes into it.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
How would the variance in sort of, I guess you would say, the value of the dollar, so say a city the same size as ours up north, you know, a house that we pay $150,000 for would be $300,000. And it impacts, you know, every area of life, not just that. So how do they make adjustments for the differences in cost of things between cities that are basically the same?
So they are able to, in those notching factors, they are able to put things in there that can kind of help skew that back to something that makes it more comparable. I will tell you, one of the things, again, that Texas generally you see where your household earnings on a national scale are not what the national average is. But at the same time, like that institutional framework, the flexibility that you have as a Texas city is much, much greater than someone like Colorado, right, which has tax caps and things of that nature. So there are certain areas where I hate to say you get dinged, because you don't necessarily get dinged, but maybe you don't score as highly there that you're going to outscore other places.
All right. Oh, another one? Good, all right. So, council, if you would just take this information, go over it, and then we'll, if you have any questions, please reach back out to Mr. Sims. At this time, if there's no exceptions, the mayor moves to suspend the rules and move to back up to item number 4, and do a recognition, but at the same time, we're gonna do a reboot of our system to bring everything back online. So, do I have any exceptions? Hearing none, so moved. This time, we have with us from 8.2, discuss public improvement district bonding process and overview. Again, this is going to be Jason Hughes with Hilltop Securities. Thank you for being patient with us as we try to work out these technical details.
We're not talking.
Go ahead.
Mayor, council, I have good news and I have bad news. And the good news is this presentation is shorter than the one I just gave.
Okay,
The
great.
bad news is it's the same presenter. So if you didn't like the previous presenter, you're out of luck on this one. So is it okay? Oh, okay.
All right, go ahead, Jason.
All right, Mayor and council, let me also introduce, so this is kind of a joint presentation.
Boy, you just
It's
have,
me,
man.
it's me. I mean, I don't know what to say now, so, yeah, no, I know, exactly.
Jeez,
No
man,
tornadoes
oh,
or
no.
anything like that around, is there? So I'm going to give the presentation. I'll go through and try and be brief. One thing I do want to point out, though, this is made in conjunctions with P3 Works. Kirk McDaniel and Zach Little are here, I should say, from P3 Works. And certainly they can answer any kind of questions you may have specific to PID administration. That's their job. And I'll go through that in just one moment. So if you'll turn with me on slide 2, Introduction to PID. So state of Texas is a little bit different than some in that you have to have statutory authority to do things. Other states, if it's not specifically prohibited, you can do it. Again, Texas is different that you have to have that. So where we find the statutory authority for public improvement districts is under Chapter 372 of the Local Government Code. So just some of the big picture considerations. One of the nice things, a PID is not a separate political subdivision. The PID is the city in the sense that you run it, right? So you maintain control of it. The nice thing about PID too is it allows you to build infrastructure, and that's publicly owned water, sewer, drainage, roads, things of that like, parks even. And you can effectively localize that cost to the people who will benefit from it, so you don't have to spread out the cost over your entire tax base. And so that's one of the main concepts of the PID, is being able to have the people in the PID pay for those infrastructure. So one of the nice things too is it can be a very helpful tool as it relates to annexation, for example. It's not uncommon that you have developers that will come in and buy land in the ETJ. One of the things that you can do to incentivize them is say, go ahead and come into our city limits. That gives you tax revenues, right, by bringing that tax base in. And it gives you a lot more say, if you will, over what they're doing now inside your city. The other thing you can do with a PID is you can ask for, or quite frankly, demand a higher level of amenities. So one of the other main concepts is if someone's moving into an area or moving into a house that's in a PID, is there's got to be a reason why they're paying that PID assessment, right? So typically you see that whether it's parks, trails, amenity centers, things like that, where they're willing to do that. So again, a higher level of amenities there. The other thing is the PID has its own revenue stream, which is the PID assessment. And so it doesn't take away from any of your other revenues, doesn't take away from tax revenues, doesn't take away from water and sewer revenues, anything like that. So it's, again, solely confined to those assessment revenues. And then that last point there, you can see PIDs can be used to forward whether you have a comprehensive plan, give a thoroughfare or traffic plan, or the parks plan. The PID can actually help out with that. So again, why utilize a PID? The nice thing is, as a city, by giving a developer the ability to create a PID and to be reimbursed for some of that public infrastructure, you're giving them a very powerful economic development tool. And a lot of times now, the developers are savvy enough to come in and say, I'll come in, I'll put in 1,000 homes, whatever the number is, but I would like this because, again, I would like some reimbursement. So it helps with that. The other thing, though, too, is a lot of times we have what we call the but-for test, which is the developer wouldn't bring the development here but for a PID. And I've certainly seen that with some of my clients where that was really one, if not the determining factor for development to come to that particular city. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility in doing some economic development. And ultimately, and this goes back, Mr. Simpson, to your question, that actually can help grow the tax base, right? So this is one way that you can actually directly impact that tax base, is by using a public improvement district. So a couple of other things that you see there that it can help with. I've had clients before where in offering that PID, they've said, we'll give you a PID, but we want larger lot sizes, we want less density, things of that nature. And so that certainly helps out with that conversation. And then I talked a little bit about the private amenities. So one thing I want to be very clear about, the PID can only pay for the public infrastructure. It can't pay for the private infrastructure. So you're not going out and funding any of that private. But again, you get back to that but-for test where the developer says, you know what, I'm getting reimbursed for my water, sewer, drainage. I'm willing to spend a little bit more money here, right, in order to put in nicer amenities for this district. And then that last bullet point you see there, city can require cash contribution. That's all part of the negotiation process. So I've had, again, clients before where they've said, we want a park or we want land donated, because we think there's going to need to be a school here. We're going to have to a firehouse or what have you. So that can certainly be part of that equation as well. So on slide 5, how does a PID work? A PID is formed over a defined area. Typically, it's within the corporate limits of the city, although it can be in the city's ETJ. It's very rare, though, that you see a city grant a PID without having that PID come into city limits. Whenever you think about that, again, you're giving them a very powerful economic development tool. You want to get some of that benefit as well in the form of tax revenues. So again, an assessment or assessments are levied. It's not a tax. So a couple of things that are kind of nice about that. That assessment is put on before the homestead is established. So it's put on day one, so to speak. It can't be changed after that. So the nice thing, if I'm a homeowner that's moving in, if I buy a home in a PID, I know that, yes, I have this assessment, but that assessment's set and it can never go any higher than that. So they have that comfort in knowing that. The other thing is, as you can see there, assessments can be paid in full or they can be paid in installments with interest. So again, I move in today, I can pay those PID assessments typically over a 30-year period, or if I want to pay it all off on day one, I can do that. And that's obviously certainly something that you can't do with taxes. That assessment is a lien that runs with the land, so I move into my home, 5 years down the road, I sell my home and move. Whoever buys that, assuming that I have not paid off my assessment early, has the assessment, the remaining assessment with that lot or with that property. And then as you can see there, those assessments can be used to pay debt service if you issue bonds for the PID, or they can be a simple reimbursement to the developer that's paid out over time. And then that last point, one of the nice things is the PID is really set up to be self-contained, meaning that you're not going to come out of your general fund, out of your water and sewer fund, or other city funds for that. Again, those assessments are structured so that they're paying, again, not only debt service or for the infrastructure, but paying for that administrative expense as well. So slide 6 is just a very simple graphical illustration. As you can see there, again, on the far left-hand side, in this illustration, home values are increasing. All things being equal, if your home value is increasing and the tax rate stays the same, you're paying more in taxes, right? Because it's on a higher value. That PID assessment, generally we structure those so they are level throughout the life. And so the nice thing there, and I've got something they'll show in just 1 second, is as your home value increases, that PID assessment is $1,000, just as an example, stays exactly the same. It's actually decreasing, right, as a percentage of your overall home value. But again, from the perspective of a homeowner being able to budget for that and knowing that, okay, here's what my assessment payment's going to be, we can give that certainty. So that's something that's nice. So I'll just very quickly go through slide 7. How is a PID created? One of the main things is the PID is developer initiated. They have to come to you. They have to request a PID. You, again, being the governing body, effectively, of the PID, can create it if you choose to, or you can say no. But again, you retain that power. So that professional services, professional services agreement set up. Again, what we're trying to do is make sure that you're not having to come out of pocket to pay professionals in the initial stages of that PID. A development agreement is put in place, and I always advise that you wait to create any kind of special district until that development agreement's in place. Because I've seen a number of developers go to a city and say, oh, we're working through this development agreement, we're almost there, let's go ahead and you create this PID because I need it times money. And then all of a sudden you create it, and then we have a situation where magically the development agreement changes and there's some things that they want in there. So again, get the development agreement in place, then create the PID. So we had the preparation of what's called the service and assessment plan, and that's, again, what Kirk and Zach are in charge of putting together. This has the assessment role. It has a list of the infrastructure that the PID will pay for. It has sources and uses in there of what funds from bonds will be used for, if there's going to be bonds, things of that nature. So all of that's encapsulated within the service and assessment plan, or what's called the SAP. So once the initial SAP and some of those other documents are prepared, there's a public hearing that's required for that levy. And then ultimately, you pass an assessment ordinance which levies the assessment on those properties. So that's passed. You approve that final service and assessment plan. If we are issuing bonds, there's certainly bond documents to be approved, things of that nature. And then you see that last bullet point, typically a 6-month process. That's probably about average. You can see some that are a little bit shorter than that, some that skew longer than that, but generally as a rule of thumb, you're looking at 6 months. So in slide 8, you can see weighing the PID benefits and challenges. You know, one thing I'm always careful to point out to my clients is a PID is not something that's used in every single development. So you certainly have to, again, look at these and look at them on a case-by-case basis. Benefits there, as you can see, again, annexation. If you have a developer in the ETJ, that's a way to incentivize them to come into the city, and again, you capture that tax base, which obviously can help increase or grow that faster than that but-for, as we talked about. Again, getting the enhanced projects or amenities within a development. You certainly want someone that they're living in a PID that can see that benefit, that can see the extra parks, the trails, things of that nature, and realize what they're paying for. And then again, if there's master plans that tie into that area, either in or around the PID, that can certainly help. As far as challenges, you can see their public perception. At the end of the day, one of the things to remember is this is an added expense, if you will, that your homeowners will be paying, right? So you need to kind of think about that. As far as the headline risk, if something were to happen, if you were to issue bonds, for example, if there was to be problems with that, one of the things that I do, that your bond counsel does, that Kirk and Zach do, is we try as much as possible to structure these deals at the outset in the development agreement to make them as risk remote as possible. Having said that, there's still going to be risk, right? It's development. Things can happen there, but I can say, to my knowledge, there has not been any defaults or anything like that in any PIDs in the state of Texas. Challenges, again, if you want to issue bonds, and typically what you'll see is your developer will come in and want you to issue bonds, again, backed solely by the assessments from the PID, because that gets them their reimbursement quicker. The administrative burden, again, P3 is on. They are fantastic. They're the #1 PID administrator in the state of Texas, so they take a lot of that burden off your shoulders. Having said that, you still have to approve certain things on an annual basis. So I give the example, this is much like a child that's going to live with you till they're 30, right? They're going to be more self-sufficient as they get older, but it's still not something that you can just say, we pass a PID and we're done, we're never thinking about it again. So, and then the last one, which this is kind of the big one, is just like with taxes, if you have a citizen in Terrell who doesn't pay their taxes, you are charged with foreclosing after certain steps, right? Same thing with the assessments. So if there is non-payment of assessments, you, city council, are charged with foreclosing on them. Now, again, it's not on February 1st, they didn't pay their assessment, you foreclose February 2nd. That's not how it's set up, but I do always point that out, that you, again, are the governing body of the PID and that you would be charged with that. So one thing that you typically see, as much as we possibly can, if we can put the assessment on the tax bill, that's what we try to do, because most people do not get their tax bill and itemize which taxes they're going to pay, right? They pay the lump sum. And so we've had great success in collection rates that typically are akin to your tax collection rates of 98, 99% with those assessments. So on slide 9, there's a lot of information here, but stick with me. I'll go through and hit each point. So the PID assessment, again, is an assessment, not a tax. However, there are certain things that we look at as far as the financial metrics where we try to measure what that PID looks like, right? One of the things that we do is the tax stack. And so we just do a simple math calculation. We turn that assessment into what's called a tax rate equivalent. And then we add it to all the other taxes that a citizen would be paying on their home, right? So you pay city, county, school, any other taxes that you may have, and then that assessment on top of it. What we're ultimately trying to get to is how much is a homeowner going to be paying on an annual basis? And is it reasonable, right? And so I will tell you, generally speaking, in the Metroplex, what we typically look at is a 305 to a 310 overlapping tax stack. So that's kind of the metric that we're looking at. And so if you look at this, and if someone were to come to you and say, you know what, we want a PID, and here's our overlapping tax stack, and it's a 370. That's probably not going to be competitive, right, with your other developments. So that's, again, one of the reasons why we're looking at that. One of the other things that we have, too, is a TERS, or Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, which I know you have and are familiar with. You can actually have a TERS overlay your PID, right? A developer sometimes may come in and say, you know what, the infrastructure I'm going to need for this development is going to be, it's going to take a little bit higher assessment, but city, if you'll give me a TERS or give me annual TERS revenues, what I'll do is I'll offset that PID assessment with some of those TERS revenues. So you can, again, have that offset. So in the example on the left-hand side, what this shows is that total tax stack you can see there of $2.86, a TERS credit, and this is just an example, so this does not relate specifically to the city, but a TERS credit of 15.5 cents, so that gets you down to a net tax stack of basically $2.71. So again, that's simply all we're trying to do is measure that. And the other thing I would say is, as you're going through this and as we're talking about this process, many times what you'll see is Kirk up here, myself, basically going through each individual development that you have before you, once it gets to that point. So we'll be talking through some of these items. The last thing I would point out on slide 9, you see there on the right-hand side, Again, I went through and talked about all things being equal, as your home values go up, if the tax rate's the same, then your tax payment's higher. You see here, since we structure those assessments to be level payments every year, that tax rate equivalent actually goes down over time. So that's one of the nice things there. On slide 10, the PID financial metrics, so we had the overlapping tax stack. The other thing we have is the value to lien. All that is simply the amount of debt placed on a property. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to make sure that there's not too much debt, right, placed on a property, that you're not overburdening your homeowners. And so you see there just a very simplistic example. Scenario 1, if the value of the land, which stays constant in all three scenarios, is $30 million, the amount of debt placed on it is $10 million, that's a 3-to-1 value to lien, right? And so a lot of times we'll target that. If you go to scenario 3, if instead of placing $10 million of debt, you place $15 million, 30 divided by 15 is 2, right? 2-to-1. So as that number gets smaller, that means there's more debt on the property. Again, we're simply looking at that on a contextual basis on what that looks for each individual development. The last slide there, slide 11, is just a summary. This does have tax increment zone, which I just touched on, but then on the public improvement districts. And so on that right-hand side, again, city council creates it, you run it. If you choose to issue debt, you're the issuer of the debt. Again, that debt is not secured by anything except the PID assessments. So you don't pledge your general taxes, you don't pledge water and sewer revenues, anything like that. It's solely assessments. So it's not a separate governmental entity. You retain all the control. The only revenue stream the PID has are those PID assessments. And then you see there, is it an additional cost to an owner? Yes. If you live in a PID, if you own a home in a PID, then you are paying that annual assessment, unlike people outside the PID. And then you see there it goes through some of the administrative responsibilities. And then finally, the termination. We can either have a specified date or once all of the assessments are collected. And so that's one of the nice things. Some other development districts can kind of go into perpetuity. This one does not. So that's one of the nice things about it. Like I said, you have the 30-year-old that whenever they turn 31, you kick them out of the house and they have to fly at that point. So again, I went through that quick. I know that's a lot of information. If there's questions.
Two things
Yes.
that need to be added to the end of that presentation. One is that the reason I wanted Jason to come forward and go through all this tonight, I wanted you to meet the P3 folks. This is a key to our negotiations with Arboretum Estates. Y'all have seen the Arboretum Estates. That's the 1,000-acre property that's south of I-20, south of the old rodeo arena, along FM 148. We created tax increment refinance zone number 2 out in that area. We're working on a development agreement. We're working on zoning. We've had your P&Z board approve the zoning associated with that piece of property, all waiting for it to come forward. So the package now is that we've got an engineering team over here. We got 3 engineers sitting over on this side of the room, and I got a bunch of financial guys on the other side of the room. It's them working together that really lands the project, right? And so over the next little while, what we'll do is we'll make sure that all of the cost estimates for various parts of infrastructure are correct, and we'll make sure that the list of infrastructure is correct, and then we'll make sure that P3 and Jason Hughes can review all of that, and we'll bring forward sort of a comprehensive package at some point soon, and we'll be asking the council to consider the creation of a public improvement district that'll be about 1,098 acres and cover all of that Arboretum Estates zone. So it's a very complicated topic. It's sort of the way that we can make sure that we manage through this process with the right balance of control and also with the right balance of the second point I want to make, which is the balance between how much money the city spends to support development versus how much money development spends to support development. So you're going to find out real soon that that's our theme tonight, because the other thing that gets involved in these negotiations is our impact fees. The very next presentation is updating our impact fee ordinance, and it really all goes together, right? You probably don't want to live in a city where the citizens who live here now pay 100% of the cost of new development coming to town, right? That sounds like a bad idea. The new development coming to town needs to shoulder some of that burden. On the other hand, you are not able to shift all of the cost of new development coming to town to new development. There has to be a little bit of a balance there. A PID helps us do that. A tax increment refinance zone helps us do that. Impact fees help us do that. So even though it's complicated, it's just part of the overall package. We're trying to make sure that an 1,100-acre piece of land, Arboretum Estates, becomes part of the future tax base of the city. We need it to be part of the future tax base of the city. That helps stabilize our credit rating over time. So just a little bit more background about why did I have Jason present on the same night we're doing impact fees and the same night we're doing the credit rating discussion. It really all works together as a good package. So that's my little add-on to Jason's presentation. I'll hand it back to you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Again, council, part of what goes into this is the development agreements as we move forward with, right? And you heard Jason say that the importance of the development agreement before the PIDs form. That's why a lot of times you hear about it once the development agreement and everybody's on the same page, because we don't want to have to come back and represent something to you and something has changed in that agreement. But I think that the city of Terrell has done a great job in negotiating these PIDs in the past and currently. And so, I've been in these meetings where the developer's wanting to do less and we request more, and we really have the upper hand because they can't move forward unless we give them that authorization. That's correct, Jason?
Correct.
So if anybody has any more comments or questions, please, at this time.
P3 is handling the administrative
Yes, sir.
ordinance. Now, I'm just trying to understand this, and I'm gonna let you go. But you got a doctor that delivers a baby, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking of P3 as being that doctor, and then having it over to the parent to raise and just kind of move on after that, split their ways. Is that kind of what we're dealing with?
Well, no, so that's a great question. So again, I didn't mean to make it sound like we're just going to leave you alone. We're not.
Yes.
So the
You
nice thing is.
you gotta take the child back to the doctor every once in a while.
That's right, that's right. So, no, so myself as financial advisor, your bond counsel, and then P3, your PID administrator, are there kind of start to finish. P3 is an extension of staff in some ways, in the sense that they are going through, they're putting together the requisite documents related to the PID. But they also go in, and I know they're fielding phone calls, for example. So you may have a resident that's like, well, I paid this PID assessment, what happened, things like that. They're trying to take the burden off your staff. And so that's the nice thing about P3 is they are there kind of on the day-to-day basis, specific as it relates to collection of assessments, things of that nature.
But thank God for P3. It takes a village to raise
Amen.
a child.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I got a question, just piggybacking off of that. So the administrative fees to P3, do we pay or the money from the PID pays it?
The PID. So that will be built into the assessment, and that's certainly something that at the outset, we take that into account.
And then, does the developer initiate this?
Yes.
Or does the city?
The developer has to initiate it because they approach you and they have to petition you to create the PID.
It always has to be like that?
Yes. And that's statutory.
Jason,
Yes, ma'am.
so I've, not in this community, but in a different community, I've heard where residents living in a PID, within a PID, may complain that their property taxes are higher compared to, another area of the community, which isn't true, which is true because of the property taxes, the regular property taxes from the city, plus the PID.
Correct.
Funds that they're paying, is a good thing to differentiate, to note between, and if you have a community member in the future, living in that area, complaining to a council member, and then we can definitely get them over to P3, right? But from what you're saying, and the example that you gave on the estimated taxes to be paid, the TRE, that makes up the taxes for the PID goes down every year based on, the projections that the P3 puts together based on the expected revenues that are coming in to pay off all that infrastructure and building all of that area up is what I'm hearing. So essentially, the TRE is going to go down, which means they're paying less PID money, but they're still going to be paying it for at least, depending on what the agreement says, 30 years potentially, until that PID ceases.
That's right, Mayor Pro Tem, if I may, I want to go through, I want to be very clear on one thing. Whenever we structure the PID, the annual installments, we basically structure those to be level over 30 years. So for instance, and again, I'm just making up a number, if it's $1,000 annual assessment, it'll be $1,000 annual assessment in year 1, $1,000 annual assessment in year 30, right? But they have the certainty of knowing what that is. The TRE, to your point, yes, as your home values rise, as a percentage, that assessment as a percentage of your home value is going down. So I do want to be very clear on that.
Of the home value.
Of the home value is going down. The annual assessment itself stays static.
I'll give you another P3, and we keep saying P3, we should really say P3 Works. That's the name of the company. P3 Works, they do a good job with making sure that when the homeowner buys the house, you've got disclosure forms. This is a huge, huge deal. You want to sit down at that title company and go through everything that needs to get signed. You're going to see, as you're buying that house, disclosure, clarification, disclosure, clarification. You're going to have documents that have to be signed at closing that really hammer home. You realize you're buying an assessment along with buying this house. And that's a really important part of the process, and we'll always want our PID administrator to make sure that that real estate element is not left undone. We need to make sure those documents are just right.
One thing, if I could add to what Mr. Sims said, and he's exactly right, not only are we making sure the homeowner knows it, because first and foremost, you want who's going to be paying it, right, for 30 years to know. We also want to make sure that the title companies can pick it up. And so a lot of that has to do with the timing in which that assessment's levied and making sure that it's on those rolls. So if I come to Terrell and I go to buy a house, whenever they pull it, yes, I should know within my paperwork, but they also look at it, it's like, oh, you're in a PID, here's the annual assessment, things of that nature. So that's one of the things that we always try and make sure, again, to Mr. Sims' point, that that is known to the homeowners.
That's what I was going to ask. Is it disclosed, like a lot of times when you do contracts on houses, and there's
Yes.
things that are disclosed to you about what was going on with the house, or there's this or whatever, is that the PID assessment disclosed at that time, or is it not disclosed until closing?
No, it should be disclosed at that time, because it has to be, the PID levy has to be established before the homestead's established.
So if it's a 30-year PID, just for the council, and year 15 you buy a home, you're only going to pay it for the 15, not for another 30 years,
Yes, sir.
right? So once the 30 years is done, it's the life of that. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Add to the land.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's not really going down, but because of the valuation going up, you can't charge over this certain amount. So that's why the numbers are going down on one of these, I think that's the way I understand, on page 9.
That's
Is that
correct.
Correct.
Yes.
And you said it can't be used for public, but like private things in that development area, right? It can
Right.
be
For
used
instance,
that.
you couldn't use it to build the swimming pool, right? So you can't use it for things like that, but your developer, since they're not having to effectively come out of pocket, right, for a lot of that public infrastructure, you can go to them and say, you know what, you're building a 1,000-home subdivision,
Right.
and we want to see a pool in there. We want to see an amenity center. So that's something that's very common.
Oh,
One other point that I would make, just as it relates to funds getting to the developer, so a lot of times they'll come to you, ask you to establish a PID, you levy the assessment, so on and so forth. They may ask you to issue bonds. The nice thing about that, if you choose to issue bonds, you put the money with a third-party trustee. The only way that they can access those funds is if they build the infrastructure, if you review it, make sure it meets the city standards, they convey that asset to you, because again, they're conveying public infrastructure, cities, roads, water, sewer to you. And it's not until that point in which you have signed off and said effectively, okay, developer, you put in the work that you said you were going to, here's your reimbursement for that.
And a lot of those, though, are within the development agreement, so once the deal, again, that's the whole purpose of waiting until the development agreement is reached before the body looks at it, for all of us to look at it.
And Mayor, that's exactly right, and that's one of the reasons why sometimes the development agreements take a little bit longer, is because we're trying to plan for as much as we possibly can at the
Right.
outset. So,
Just as by way of example, in the Arboretum Estates project, you would think of the Los Lomas extension that goes from one side of the residential area to the other side of the residential area. That's an example of a project that would be PID eligible.
Who's that? Phone, that's your phone?
Okay. We talked a lot about P3 Works. Can we be polite to P3 Works and let them come up and say howdy and introduce themselves? I know you did, Jason, but they're valuable members of the team, and I want them to give them a chance. Just say hi.
Hello, good evening. My name is Kirk McDaniel of P3 Works. We really appreciate your time tonight. This is Zach Little. He's a project analyst with us. You'll be seeing us a lot as the Arboretum Estates project moves forward, but we're really excited about it. Jason did such a good job covering the PID and making us look good that I don't feel like I have too much to add, but I'm happy to answer any questions. If you guys
I
have
wanted Kirk to stand up here partly because I wanted to thank him in front of the council for all the hard work he put into our tax increment refinance zones. So the project plans that you saw, Kirk is one of the folks behind the scenes helping to create those documents. Great job on those, and now there'll be a good seamless interface between a future public improvement district and a TERS that we've already created. And that's part of the overall strategy here. So thanks, guys, for being here.
Thank
Well,
you.
You know what, let me add on to Mike's statement. These PIDs and these TERS are very complicated, and for our staff to just have to handle it all, that would be asking a whole lot, but thank you guys for all that you do for us. Appreciate it,
I have
yes.
a question for either of you, Kirk. When looking at, well, so mentioned TERS a moment ago. Of course, TERS also have a very specific boundaries, but can you have the TERS commit specific dollar amounts to go to a project outside of the TERS? Or special projects or donations to a,
No, it has to stay inside.
It's very specific, and it would very much depend on the project, depending on legal's review of it. It does come across sometimes where there are certain major projects that we would call that benefit the TERS district that may be located adjacent to it or just outside the boundary, in which case it could be eligible, or a portion of it could be eligible for TERS funding. But that's not typical. Typically, all of the improvements the TERS is going to fund would be within the boundaries of it.
So an example would be if you needed a larger water line to service, you might be able to fund some of that, a portion
Yes.
of it.
Yes, sir. If it was like an off-site water line that was going to bring water services to lots within the TERS, it would be eligible.
thank you.
I mean, I was wondering this, like, if you guys are the administrators of this, it seems like as the value go up and 30 years down the road, you're still getting the same amount. I don't want to say the word lucrative, but is there like a certain percentage you charge based on the agreement?
There's a flat administration fee that we collect, but then there's also other annual collection fees for facilitating the assessment role. So like county fees to get it on there. But it's specific. Usually, it's going to be a very small percentage of the overall annual installments.
I was just wondering, when you think about inflation and stuff, it just saying in 30 years, I don't know if it, but if that's what you do, that's what you do.
It's pretty small incremental increases
Okay.
each year. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one additional piece of feedback for both Hilltop Securities and P3 Works, is that, I enjoy seeing like the project plan for TERS or for PIDs. It's a lot of numbers and data that comes forth, but I also really appreciated having a presentation like this where you do have some graphs and charts and additional language that we can follow along with and then take back as a reminder. So just a note moving forward. Really appreciate presentations like these.
We can do that, absolutely.
All right, thank you, Kirk. Zach, appreciate you being here with P3 Works. Next on the agenda is discuss impact fees update. This is our Senior Director of Capital Project, Steve Rogers.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. You need help with please. Just filling that in. I hold these for, my assistants are passing out a map right now.
Yeah. Hey, that's ink. Don't get that ink on you. It comes through. I don't know where it came from. Okay, yes. Mr. Rogers?
I'd like to introduce a couple of my friends and consultants that have patiently waited for the last couple hours for their few minutes of fame here. We have Eddie Haas with us from Friesen Nichols. He's the Vice President of Transportation Planning Manager, and Melissa Brunger, she's an associate in the Water and Wastewater Planning, and they've both been working on impact fees for us since 2009. And so they've been around, they know our system, and they've been able to assist us quite a bit because they know what's going on. So before Eddie kicks things off, I'm gonna hand you out some more information here in a minute. I want to show you this map and explain to you how we got to where we're at. So 20 years ago, I was here laboring with the city of Terrell. Some of you others were doing other things back then. And so in 2003, we had a developer come to us that's in this area up on the top right-hand side of the map. That's 365 acres out off Griffith Avenue, and said, I want to build a bunch of houses out here. And we said, we can't serve you. We don't have enough sewer capacity out there, and it's going to cost us an enormous amount of money for that to happen. And so the city issued a development moratorium on this area in 2003 until we could implement impact fees. And so we took a year, 9 months. We developed impact fees. We put them in place in April 2004. We were able to lift the development moratorium for this area. You can see the streets that border this. It went all the way out to Rose Hill and I-20 or 2578 and I-20 and all the way over to the industrial park and all the way up at the time following the city limits up to 205 to the north edge of town to encompass this area. And so this is a drainage area, sewer shed that all drains down to the Rose Hill lift station. And so I just wanted to let you know how this all started. We couldn't provide service to a developer. And so here we are 20 years later, and we have spent a lot of money in this basin. And with the next project you do on the 205 utility relocations, we'll have sewer even closer to this, but it's taken nearly 20 years to get sewer close enough of capacity to reach this development to serve it. So Eddie's gonna come up here in just a minute. Come on, Eddie, make your way up. So we follow chapter 395 of the local government code. It's pretty simple. Statutorily, we're required to update this every 5 years. And so Eddie does roadways and Melissa does water and wastewater, and they're very good at what they do, and we're glad to have them around. So Eddie's gonna go through a PowerPoint presentation I'm gonna hand out to you now.
Very good. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to come back to Terrell to assist you in the update of the impact fee program. Steve's right. This is my third go-around, so I've been assisting Terrell since the 2009 update. Same with Melissa. She's been leading the water and wastewater component. So as Steve mentioned, impact fees are mandated and controlled through Chapter 395 of the Texas Local Government Code. It's very specific about the kinds of projects that can be included in there. The projects typically involve capacity enhancements, new capacity being placed out there. And then the premise is that as new development comes to Terrell, that new development should help pay their fair share of that cost. Okay, so this is not different from PID. This is a fee, a one-time fee that new development based on the size and intensity or how much capacity gets consumed by a proposed development. They're paying a proportionate cost of projects on a specific CIP, the impact fee CIP. We have a brief presentation tonight. We'll have a more robust one when we do, it's called a Impact Fee 101 with the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. So we're going to kind of hit higher level, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. The 395 is very specific, and so it's this one-time charge that new development is assessed based on the size and intensity of development and the impact that it's creating on the system. Now, we say system because the impact is not specifically aligned with, well, the roadway right adjacent to their property. Traffic is being generated by new development that's affecting other roadways. Therefore, there's the system impact, same with water and wastewater. So this program is very systematic and structured in the sense that new development, based on the kind, type of development, whether it's, say, fast food restaurant versus an office or an industrial versus residential, they generate traffic differently. They generate demand for water and sewer differently. Therefore, the impact is based on the intensity of development. That's how the impact is calculated. The more intense the impact, the higher the fee. So the basic premise here is who pays for growth, right? You basically have two pots of money to pay for projects. For example, we had in the current impact fee program, we had $70 million of roads, of which $25 million is attributable to growth. In other words, we're only collecting $25 million of that $70 million for impact fees. We're not going to lose it, but the basic premise is as the city is building roads, someone's going to pay for that cost. And if new development's not sharing in that, your tax base picks up that cost. Okay, not in the form of an annual tax. It's just the raw capital cost to get those facilities on the ground. Okay, so that's a big distinction there. So if you hear O&M costs and an annual fee, that's aligned with more of a user fee. For impact fees, strictly new capacity, new capital costs. What's it cost to put those facilities on the ground? Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. Without an impact fee program, that means that your tax base obviously has to find a way to shoulder that burden through bonds, things like that. So as I kind of mentioned, the more intense the development, the higher the fee. So it's in the case of roads, size, a service area. The roadway program has we actually have 3 service areas. There's an east and a west in Brushy Creek. And the reason we have service areas is so that monies that are collected in one portion of the town aren't spent on improvements on the other side of town. So for roads, the city, there's a 6-mile limit on those service areas. So we went through an analysis and we developed a service area structure that's been in play since 2004, and we've maintained that, only adding in new areas that have come into the city limits. That's another distinction. In the case of roads, only projects within the city limits are eligible for consideration and impact fees. For water and wastewater, it's those projects that are within the water service area or a CCN that can be considered. So in the case you're talking this PID outside the city limits would not be eligible for impact fees. It's outside in the ETJ, would not be eligible. If there is a development agreement where they're coming into the city, then part of that process is if the city limits are amended and that thing is part of the city, then they would be subject potentially to the fee. We have to be very careful that we're not double dipping on cost, right? If this PID is picking up the cost of facilities and there's some portion that the impact fee program is picking up, we want to make sure that we're not double dipping on both sides. So we have to be very detailed in what we're considering. So for roads, it's assessed at platting, it's collected at building permit. The case of water, wastewater, it's based on the meter size, and that's typically when they tap into the system, that's when the fee is collected. The kinds of projects that are considered are those projects that are part of your official master plan, your city thoroughfare plan, your city water master plan or wastewater master plan, only those projects within there. And there's certain limitations. In the case of roads, arterial or collector class streets can be considered. In the case of water facilities, I think it's 6 inches or greater. 6 inches or greater are eligible for incorporation into the program. So why do cities have impact fees? And they're not new to North Texas. I mean, there are many communities that have impact fees. We'll show a graph here later that shows the impact fees and with those communities that have such programs, but it's basically to pay for the cost of the development that's required for capacity enhancements, okay? New connections take capacity. We're paying for those facilities to implement those system-wide facilities, okay? So there's new impact, there's new traffic being generated, there's a demand for water. That additional revenue is aimed at paying for their fair share cost of that. Any of those costs that are not paid or considered for impact fee program are obviously picked up by your existing residents. There are many other cities that have it, have impact fee programs, you know, Rockwall, Forney, they're all communities close by that have the program, so there's quite a few across the North Texas area that have them. And as a matter of fact, impact fees in areas that would never consider them are now having them. In the Southeast, out in West Texas. So they're mainly across the board now for helping new development pay their fair share. So how are they set? There's kind of a process involved. We have to forecast over a 10-year window population and employment growth. We look at those two things because of impact that's created by either residential development or non-residential development, office, commercial, retail. So we look at pop and employment growth. We look at historically how we've been growing in Terrell over the last maybe 1, 3, 5 years. Look at a compound annual growth rate. We make a forecast for 10 years. It's called land use assumptions. From land use assumptions, how we're going to grow, we develop a capital improvements plan of what we need to cover this additional growth. From there, there's the straight math on what is the technical derivation of a cost per service unit. And then becomes the policy side of things. So we go through a lot of rigorous math to get to the technically bottom line. What does it cost to provide a unit of road or a unit of water, wastewater? Then it becomes a policy consideration. What does Terrell want to ask the development community to chip in terms of a collection rate? Okay, so there's many things that go into that. In fact, in the road program, we'll show a slide here shortly, we had a slowly incremental increasing rate. One thing is certain, we have not gone above a collection rate of 50%. The reason for that is new development comes to the community, they raise the ad valorem tax value of the property. There should be a credit for that value and an increase. And so the law says if you don't do a finance analysis, you credit the cost of the CIP by 50%. We've always gone with the credit because the presumption is we don't want to charge greater than 50%. We will revisit that issue as part of this update. Do we want to consider going above that threshold, or do we want to maintain status quo of what we have been collecting as part of the previous programs? So why should a developer not pay 100% of the cost of infrastructure? Well, in some respects, the projects become unaffordable. It becomes harder from a land cost, from an implication for them to build those improvements. But when growth occurs, everybody benefits. Even residents in the community benefit from that. You got more growth coming in, you got new water facilities, there's just a general benefit above all. So the policy from Terrell's perspective is that we have not gone above that threshold. Well, you'll see those numbers here in a second. Will impact fees hurt growth? As long as the development community the impact fees are attractive in terms of the implication relative to other communities, then the development will be willing to shoulder their fair share. As I mentioned, impact fees are not new. They've been in the state since the late 80s. And so particularly in North Texas, so if you hear the developer say, well, golly, you know, I could go next door and not pay an impact fee, that is their prerogative. Somebody else will come to Terrell because growth and development in North Texas, what are we at, 30 million, going to go to 50+ million over the next 20 years. The growth is coming. So you all, as from a fiscal steward perspective, you've been collecting up to that 50% and asking development to chip in a portion of that cost for impact fees. What can impact fees pay for? It's to put those appurtenances on the ground: construction, engineering, right-of-way acquisition, utility relocations, debt service is eligible. All the hard costs, the hard capital costs to put those projects on the ground. Okay, these can be for projects that are on your thoroughfare plan and that haven't been built. They could be for widenings, the new capacity that's added from when you go from a 2-lane to a 4-lane. Those new 2 lanes, we're adding capacity. It could be the $10 the very narrow 10-foot, 15-foot roadway that we're formalizing into a 2-lane facility that can be considered. So again, there's a capacity enhancement there. We have to also be very careful that we're not double dipping in terms of we're modernizing. There's some requirements there in 395 that we're not paying for modernization, so we have to be very careful on that. Here's a little bit of background of the impact fee program. When it started in '04, the associated ordinance numbers, and yes, by law, we have to update the program at least every 5 years. In other words, we're planning for some projects that haven't been built. In the 5-year update, if projects have been built, we're plugging those actual costs into the program. In terms of defining the costs associated with those projects, we're conservative. We're on the low side of costs. We're not padding contingencies. We're trying to take it conservative because we don't want to put the city in the position of a potential refund. So we're always on the low side on that. Final bullet there is, yes, you as the leadership for the community, you all will decide from a policy perspective what that collection rate will be. And that'll be through a public hearing process. There'll be one public hearing. We will be working with the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. They will be making a formal recommendation to you all in terms of the growth rate, the 10-year land use assumptions, the projects in the CIP. They may offer some considerations on the collection rate. Okay. And then you all will hear that as part of the public hearing and then deliberate that through the public hearing process. This is an example of revenues that have been collected here in Forney. I'm looking over at Steve, and I might be looking at Mr. Sims because I am not aware. I'm not aware of the collections. Other than you can see that impact fees there have been revenues associated with the program. It was $300,000. There's been a slight dip in the fiscal years 2021, and then obviously there must have been a significant number of or amount of development in 22 that we collected a significant portion of fees. So. Steve or Mr. Sims, is there any elaboration on perhaps how things occurred last year?
I'd just say that we went through a period of, say, FY 19, 20, 21, where a lot of the projects that we were seeing were projects that were either in a development agreement where they were building infrastructure or made a consolidated payment. So we had, for example, the Gilcrest projects that made negotiated payments over to do the lights at Breezy Hill and stuff like that. So sometimes we're using them as a jumping off point for negotiations, and sometimes the developer's just building something that's impact fee credit. So if they build a road or they build a water line, they can do that instead of actually paying the fee.
Yeah, that's a great point there, Mike. Development builds a road, there should be a credit against the impact fee, and so that's likely what's going on in some of these in terms of revenue from impact fee program. I am going to turn it over to Melissa to cover a few last slides on some of the technical elements, the collection rate that is currently in play here in Terrell. So Melissa.
Just keep going. So we wanted to outline the study tasks, so just kind of the process that we go through in terms of updating impact fees. Eddie said on this before, so I won't spend too much time on this, but we will revisit service areas. He mentioned earlier roadway service areas have a specific area they have to be within, so there are several in the city of Terrell and has to be within the city limits. For water and wastewater, we can go outside of the city limits, including your ETJ and any area in your water and wastewater CCNs. So a little bit different service areas for water and wastewater versus roadway. And then we'll develop land use assumptions, so working with you all to see, where is the growth occurring, how much growth should be occurring. Now, there are a lot of specific developments that are known, so we want to make sure we capture those and looking at where the development's occurring, because that's where we're going to put our projects. And then we'll use the land use assumptions to develop service units. So what are the growth in number of meters for water and wastewater? And then roadway, they'll look at vehicle miles. That's their service unit. So then the next step is looking at existing capacity. You build water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure to last, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in the future. So we want to make sure we capture that existing capacity that can help serve growth. So we'll look at that first, and then we'll also look at where do you need new improvements. So a lot of times if you're expanding into areas that have no infrastructure, we'll make sure we'll capture that. And then also, if you need pump station improvements or specific facility improvements, we'll make sure we capture those there. And And so all of this really wraps up into the calculation of looking at all the improvements that you need and then dividing that by your land use assumptions. And that's where you get, what is the cost per household for new developments. So a lot of details and technical work that goes into that. Throughout the process, we will involve the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee and get their buy-in on land use assumptions, on the capital improvements, and then on the calculations of maximum allowable that can be charged. And this is all in Chapter 395, so it's very prescriptive on the steps that we have to take to update impact fees. And all that will be addressed in the report that we do at the end of this study. A little bit about the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. That's typically been the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we've added one person within the ETJ. And so I'm assuming we'll do that for this study as well. And they will provide input several times throughout the project. So we, bring a lot of things in front of them and make sure they're all good with everything before we bring the final product to you in the end. So they'll talk through land use assumptions, the growth estimates, and then the CIP and calculations. We'll have 3 separate meetings with them throughout the project. A little bit about your current impact fee schedule. We did ramp it up over the last 5 years. So the impact fees were adopted in April of 2019. For both water and wastewater, we are charging 50%, which is the maximum allowable with the credit. And then for roadway, we started at 25%, and then we're ramping up to 40% over that 5-year window. So that's pretty similar to the approach we've done over the last several updates. We've started kind of at the current impact fee rate and then ramped up a little bit, so it's not a big adjustment, all 1 year. So this is a similar approach to what we've done the last several updates, and it's pretty typical. We see that similar approach quite a bit. So just, I guess, rolling that up, about one single-family home would pay about $5,000 back in 2019, and then now it would be closer to $6,000. So that's a one-time fee, so that's not something you have to keep paying, just the one-time fee whenever they're building a new development, new home, new, fast food restaurant, whatever it is. The one thing that we always do as part of these studies is benchmarking. What are other cities charging for impact fees? So this graph shows for a single-family residential home, impact fee benchmarking for a lot of different cities. This was our benchmarking graphic from the last study, so you can see where the maximum allowable landed, kind of a little bit farther on the left side compared to where you were charging in 2018, and then we ended up a little bit in the middle. But you can see, from Flower Mound and Waxahachie and Denton on the far left side, all the way down to Kaufman and Rockwall and Keller, McKinney that have a little bit lower fees. And these are numbers from back in 2018, 2019, so some of these may have changed over the last 5 years, but we'll make sure they're all updated as we benchmark for this current update. Overall, we're looking at about an 8-month schedule, so we anticipate getting started in the next few weeks, and then appointing the advisory committee in March, and starting with our first advisory committee meeting in late March. And then we'll have our advisory committee meetings also in June and August. So just kind of throughout the project, making sure they're staying in the loop, understanding what we're doing, approving what we're doing. And then we'll be back in front of council around October for the public hearing. So about an 8-month schedule. Oh, hey. Do you have any? I know, I was like, oh. Do you have any questions or anything you'd like to discuss? Okay, Steve probably has lots of questions and comments. Benchmarking or schedule?
I just want to
Schedule?
that slide right there, yeah.
Okay.
So I just want to reiterate a couple of things here. So your task is going to be as a council is to appoint the CIAC, Capital Improvements Advisory Committee, soon. We'll come back to you with a resolution for you to do that at one of your next meetings upcoming. So you're going to have to add one person to the P&Z that has real estate development experience, so y'all need to be thinking about that, of somebody who might be able to fill that role. And these guys only meet about 3 or 4 times over the next 6 months. And these guys do work, they give it to the CIAC, they make some decisions along the way, and then as you notice, The council doesn't come in to the end of this, so I go back to the green boxes there. There's a public notice, September 8th. We have dates already picked, ready to go. You have a public hearing on the land use assumption impact fees on October 10th, and then you adopt an ordinance after that. So that's the council's act. You'll do one thing is appoint the CIAC, and you really won't see anything else till we get to the end. We'll bring you the results of this, and there'll be a public meeting for input from the public, and then you adopt an ordinance to update. I just want to reiterate that.
So how many members are on this committee?
Well, it's the Planning and Zoning Commission, which has, how many members are on P and Z? 8?
9.
9. There's 9 members on there. We'll add one more to make it 10.
So the P and Z, which is already, we know who those members are, and then we're gonna appoint one more.
Only one person that's got real estate development type experience like that.
And that's from our citizenry or from someone up
It could be
here?
in our ETJ or in our city limits, huh?
But not a council member.
We need to have somebody from the
They
ETJ.
want to charge in the ETJ.
So you need
that
somebody
again?
you need to have somebody in our ETJ on this.
Okay,
So you need to find somebody with development or real estate experience that lives in the ETJ of Terrell. And so you gotta think that out a little bit. So
All right.
we need y'all to go ahead and start kind of thinking about who that might be.
here's my request, that you need this by when are we trying to do that one, in March?
We don't have a hard date right now, but yes, we're gonna put together a resolution after tonight and come back to you in the next 2 or 3 weeks, probably with a resolution to appoint the committee. We'll probably meet with them, in, March, at the end, at the end of March. So we'll have a P and Z meeting. Right after the P and Z meeting, we'll have a CIAC meeting.
Okay,
And so
so,
we'll couple those, so it'll probably be end of March when we meet. So probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be back to you to appoint the CIAC and find somebody that has that experience.
all right, so council, the mayor would request that you get a name to me within the next couple of weeks. Yes.
So does that person, is there any kind of restriction on if they're doing any kind of current development in the Terrell area, or is it just usually looked on as better if they're not, or if they are?
Yeah, the law is very specific that at least 40% needs to be comprised of building, real estate, or development if you don't use your Planning and Zoning Commission. If you use your Planning and Zoning Commission, at least one person on that advisory committee has to be from those industries. Ideally, that person in the ETJ is in one of those industries, real estate, development, or building.
Okay.
Yeah. It just helps from a transparency perspective. You know, there's an investment there. They're tied into the development activity and how all that works and how that impacts as it relates to new development.
So, the request would be that we each, if you're interested in us reviewing someone, please get that name to us so that we can do some background on it, and then we'll decide as a body which of those that have been submitted will serve on this committee. Okay. Yes.
And either, excuse me, their staff or Eddie and Melissa, Eddie or Melissa, for real estate, and then I'm hearing development and or construction. They're not databases that staff or someone could pull on where, a registered real estate individual may live, and we could pull them by zip code, so then we can review those individual names.
I would say that we have not been that methodical about it in the past. In the past, we've just brainstormed, and staff can do this, about, well, what builders do we have who happen to be, or real estate agents do we have that happen to be just outside of town? And so we'll do a little legwork on our side also to help you with some names. And it does seem like there's always somebody we can think of who can serve that role. It just takes a little bit of thinking, and we'll help.
Anybody have any other questions or comments for?
Can you review what you were talking about? I think it was page 14 where you said there's a mandate that it can only increase by 50. I heard something about 50%. Tell me. I don't know if that was the water, waste, and water.
Yeah, so looking at the numbers here and comparing them, the water and the wastewater, the policy decision was to collect at that maximum, that 50% rate. The infrastructure involved in those programs is so expensive that it was in the best interest of the city to collect at that maximum. You look at the roadway, you can see how the roadway since 2019 has increased slowly over the years, this incremental increase. and this is by design. The city was cognizant of not being too hard on development and wanted to just slowly stair-step that up, and that increase was about 5% each year. So in 2019, the collection rate was about 25% of maximum allowable. And so that increase over time, where we are here, that'll go into effect here in April, will be at the 40% rate, still under that 50% threshold.
So even that's gonna have a 50% mandated?
That'll be right. The threshold is we won't be collecting greater than 50%. All these numbers are gonna be, as we consider the new capital improvements program in developing new cost estimates, obviously construction cost has gone through the ceiling. A lot of numbers are gonna change. So what this table reflects is the actual impact fee. So that this number could change. And so when we bring it back before you and when we work through the advisory committee, we'll be showing, hey, here's where you were from a collection rate perspective. Here's where you can go. Where do you think we should be? It's kind of highlighted in this benchmarking slide, if you will. If you look at on the left slide, there's what we call Terrell max allowable. It's kind of the light shaded one. That was the maximum calculation that you could have gone to if you wanted to collect the full threshold there.
On what page?
I'm sorry, page 15, I'm sorry. But the decision was, because of the road component and you can see the kind of lightly shaded column and toward the right, that was the policy decision on the roads. And really, it's the road piece that we're slowly ramping up.
Okay.
So you're talking, I know you say one-time impact fee. One-time impact fee covers different areas, like one-time impact fee for roadway, one-time impact fee for wastewater, and one-time impact for water impact.
That's correct. Those three infrastructure components are only what we're considering.
So think of it as when I come in and pull a building permit, whether it be for a new auto dealership or for a fast food restaurant, Melissa used that example, or it's a single-family house, the moment I pull my building permit, I can't get my building permit unless I pay this fee, okay? And so that's what's happening here behind the scenes, is that we're calculating that number. We're saying, okay, you're building an apartment complex. Okay, here's the impact fee with the apartment complex. It's such and such dollar amount, and that fee needs to get paid.
So,
Thanks for that, because that was just my next question. You just answered.
so the impact fee is on new construction, not anything existing. You don't repay an impact fee.
We
It's
can
only at the-
recoup existing, if there's excess capacity in facilities, we can recoup some of that cost.
Yeah, if they're increasing the plant
But it's
size
a
or
new,
something.
it's a capacity enhancement, generally new capacity into the infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay.
I do have an additional question, and maybe staff can answer this. Remind me, is Rockwall the boundary between the east and west areas for service fees collection?
Well, actually, so Rockwall has its own impact fee program. Their roads is
You're talking
confined
about
to
the
their
road,
city.
Rockwall.
Street.
City.
The dividing line between east and west in
I'm
the
not
city
that
of Terrell.
far off.
I think that's,
All thrown off.
I'm looking at,
I was like,
Rockwall Street.
What does that mean?
yes, I'm looking at Eddie's map here. He's got here, and yes, Rockwall Avenue has been the dividing line between what we've called east and west service areas. However, because we've annexed, we've had to create another service area for roadways called Brushy Creek, which is way out, that annexation that goes way out to Forney, McLendon, Chisholm. So, but in the town proper, we generally have an east and a west service area. Water and roadways have been divided down Rockwall Avenue, generally speaking, all the way through town.
thank you.
My apologies, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Can I ask you this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, when I'm looking at page 15, does the width of those graphs, the lines of the graph mean anything?
Well, what we've shown in this graph is really how the composite total impact fee, in this case, we were looking at single-family residential, is what are the different components? The red is the water piece of the fee, the blue is the wastewater piece, and the green is the roadway. So if there was the curiosity of, well, what's Mesquite doing roadway-wise, you can see that it's a much larger green versus what we have here in Terrell.
Okay, because that's what I was looking at. When I look at the population of some of these places, I'm surprised, that sometime look like I'd expect
So,
the roadway
but-
to be a lot
But,
wider, and it's not.
yeah, that,
versus some of the-
we hear that question a lot. The one thing we have to remember is that the cost, the calculation is predicated on a unit cost basis. So in other words, if we have $100 million of roads providing a certain amount of capacity, it's made up of service units of road, vehicle mile, okay? In each city, Mesquite, they're gonna have their own CIP, but it's all calculated on how much of that cost is attributable to growth. So if you see Mesquite there's more green, that means that their raw cost for providing a unit of road is just more expensive. Perhaps there's more bridges, more, things like that, expensive items like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is also what they're charging. So the maximum allowable could have been really high, and they said, we don't want to charge that high, we're just going to charge this. So that's something also to take into account. This is what they're charging, not what they could be charging.
And we like to provide this graph because most communities want to know what some of their peer cities that have impact fee programs are collecting.
We
Yeah,
do,
and-
absolutely.
And I'll say that this graph will get interesting when you redo it this summer because everyone will be dealing with this massive cost increase in public infrastructure. If we see our roadway, Temple is just an example. We thought it was going to be 1 million. It came in at 1.6 million. Metro Drive, we thought would be 2 million. It came in at 4 million. If that's the numbers that come back with some of this, you're going to see different impact fees the next time around.
So I just want to clarify this. The water and the wastewater, we're already at that max mandate.
That's correct.
We can't go up any higher.
No, but that number will change this go-round, this programmatic update, depending on what it costs to provide the water and wastewater.
Yeah, that,
So it may go up.
Yes, ma'am.
2019.
right, yeah. It was a council decision in 2019 to charge the maximum that was calculated then. You get a 200-page impact fee report that these nice folks here create for us, and that very nice lengthy thing tells you the price tag of all the infrastructure. If you don't have that study, then you can't charge impact fees at all. And so there's a technical basis to that. If we find out that the infrastructure for water is 5 times as expensive this time around, you might not be looking at the same number. You'd be looking at a much bigger number. That's why I say this is great information, but it's really looking backwards
That's
for
correct.
2019. This summer, we'll find out what it looks like when we're looking into the future again.
That's correct.
Yep. Mike, did you have some, McKeska, you wanted to, I saw you gonna, okay.
Y'all, the agreement was also included in what was handed out, separate handout. So what it's gonna cost. The fee negotiated is not to exceed $149,700. This is funded in the impact fee fund. It's an eligible cost from revenues collected. So that is the proposed plan, and that is what we will be bringing back for vote next time.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Next on the item, go 8.4.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have for you for discussion this evening, ordinance number 2954, an ordinance of the city of Terrell, Texas, authorizing a property tax reimbursement program for annexed properties, authorizing the city manager to negotiate and enter into city property tax reimbursement agreements for certain categories of property that the city may add to the city's corporate limits through annexation, providing a separability clause and providing an effective date.
Mr. Sims.
So, Mayor and Council, I'm just going to touch on this quickly since we talked about it last time. I tried to be a good listener last time. This is the reimbursement that you might receive if you get annexed. And we wanted to create a program like that to kind of put our money where our mouth is. We know we do annexations for the future and for preserving land and to make sure that we have quality development on the edge of the city. It's not a punitive thing that we're trying to do about the existing homeowners or property owners. So last time around, I had made the suggestion that we tightly constrain this to just homeowners. After listening to council feedback last time, the new draft of this ordinance expands this to just impact all properties. And that way we're not worried about any distinction between, is it a commercial property, is it an agricultural property, is it a residential property, is it a rental property, whatever it is, everybody gets the exact same opportunity for every single parcel we bring in. I felt like that's what I was hearing last time around, so I've incorporated those changes here. Last time around, we had some discussion about how many years to do this. I had suggested 2 years. Council wanted to be, or at least my listening to council, I felt like y'all were having a conversation about maybe making that a bit longer, and then maybe creating a sliding scale. So if you read through the details of the draft ordinance, you'll see that you've got 100% for year 1, 100% for year 2, 60% for year 3, and then 30% for year 4. So that's a sliding scale. The first 2 years, it's 100%, and then the second 2 years, you kind of ease into making that full payment. We did add a provision that was probably a good catch as we were going through the legal side of it. The notion goes like this. Last time around, we were going to have to do specialty agreement with certain commercial businesses coming in town to say, hey, you can do that thing as a commercial business for some number of years. Well, if we set the ordinance up correctly, we can make sure that we could put provisions like that into the individual no contest agreements. So we've incorporated that language here. And then the other thing is just a process tweak that we made. One of the council questions last time was, well, what's the due date for these? And I had felt like the best way to administer the program was I really need to get your no contest agreement in place before the city council passes the annexation ordinance. And as we talked through that with the legal team, we decided to incorporate language here that basically says, hey, look, not only are we going to do these as negotiations between the city manager and the landowner, we'll also do it where all of the no contest agreements get packaged up as attachments to the annexation ordinance. And that really affirms this issue about are we, making sure we keep track of the information, because attaching it to the ordinance is a great way to do that, and then B, making sure that there's a public element to the process so that everybody can see, hey, that's what happened on that piece of land because that's public information, it's attached to that ordinance. So we felt like that was sort of a process improvement as well. We did not put it on the agenda for action tonight. Just wanted to provide another opportunity to discuss it or get council feedback and let you guys see the new draft of the updated ordinance.
Yep. Mike, thank you. I like the changes. I think they're fair. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Mr. Sims?
Yeah, my question was just to clarify, when land is usually annexed, they just come into whatever and they have to pay those taxes?
Yes, that's correct.
So we're just trying to provide some relief for those that came in.
Yes.
I guess part of it's relief, and I think part of the thing that I've heard when I talk to folks that we've annexed in the past is just, you know, what's my step-by-step way to plan for this? You know, you kind of get a year or a year and a half, depending on when you get annexed, to make that first property tax payment. But then after that, well, did you plan your budget for it? Your mortgage is normally something you've made a lot of strong considerations for, and you know what that is, and you know how you've planned it. So the idea here is, well, not only do you get the natural lag, you have to get added to the tax roll, and again, that can be a lengthy period of time, but you also get for sure the first 2 reimbursements, and then the 60% and the 30% after that.
It seems like, I don't know, it seems like it'd be more reasonable and fair to just delay the time that they have to come into the city versus charging half of this, the INS versus the M&O and all that. It's just like, you're in the city. If the city people quack, everybody quacks, you're in the city. I don't know, it's just like, if we need to give them more time, I'd be okay with giving them more time. If they say a year is not enough, 2 years, it's okay, it just kind of eases them in there. They save a little money, but I don't really understand the, you know, you only pay this.
I guess I would say that you just said the exact program that I went down to Austin in 2019, and I said, please make it legal for us to do what you just said. And we're just working in the constraints of state law. If you own a piece of agricultural property and the city raises its hand and says, hey, let's annex, then there's a state law allotment or allowance for us to be able to do exactly what you just said. Oh, you want 3 years before you bring ag property in? We'll sign an agreement, and we'll both know that after 3 years, you're coming into the city limits. We asked for permission of the state legislature to create that program for people with commercial businesses, homesteads, rental properties, blah, 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 and we just got shot down. And so because they won't let us do a little friendly entry into the city under a state law program, we had to create a workaround for it. So while I wish I had a different state law allowance, this is something we can do under state law. And I tend to agree with you. I wish we could do it a different way, but this is a way we are allowed to do this program.
I mean, and if we annex, I think we just need to follow the rules of annexation as far as if you're in the city, we do what other people in the city do. That's what I'd like to see. I don't know if that's being outrageously crazy or, I mean,
So,
I don't
you know,
know how to.
yeah,
explain
so I think, Councilwoman, what you're gonna hear when we have these annexation hearings is people are gonna come up and they're gonna complain to the council that all we're doing is chasing revenue. The only reason why we want them in our city is because we want their tax dollars. Well, that's not the case. What we're trying to do is protect our entryways and to protect the city as it grows. So we show them, we demonstrate to them, hey, that's not what the intent of the council is. And so we try to take that away. Also, you're gonna hear that there's a land grab going on, that all you want is more land. Well, all we're doing is going after the land that was grandfathered by previous mayors and councils. We're not adding on to anything. It's only that part that had been grandfathered, and as the development's coming, it's coming faster, so the quicker that we act, the better off we're gonna be as a city as that development comes. So that's really what we're trying to, but I hear you, I understand you, I wish you,
I just don't want the demonstration to have people that's already in the city abiding by the rules, paying the taxes and everything, to get on this side, the defensive going, oh, okay.
I wish y'all would do that deal with us. I know, yeah.
So now I'm saying, I don't know how many people we already got in here paying. I don't know how many people this gonna impact the people we are annexing, but I would just figure it's probably more that's already in there paying than the new people. I could be wrong on that, but it's gonna be pros and cons either way, and I'm just trying to look at it like it is, like, hey, this is what I got to do this, and let me do it. If you don't, there's gonna be trouble from the other side.
Right, yeah.
But I hear what you're trying to do. You're trying to appease those that have those arguments and trying to
No,
demonstrate that we are not money chasing and grabbing land, but on the other side, I know those people may have some concerns as well, and I'm just trying to look at it from both sides.
well, I think one of the differences is when you buy inside the city limits, you know you're gonna be paying those taxes. So you count on that. If you bought land, what you thought would never be annexed 15 years ago, it's not your fault that the city has grown so rapidly that now you're gonna be inside the city limits, and that's the consideration that we're given to those that have bought land and for whatever reason thought we'd never be inside the city limits. I lived out in the country when I was a kid, and if you'd have told me that 429 would develop the way it was as a kid, I'd have said, there's no way. I mean, I'd walk 429, never see a car pass, and it's changed. So we're trying to lessen the pain because it's no fault of theirs that the city has grown, and we're just trying to be good and compassionate with those that are now going to be annexed. That's the whole thing. But Those are my thoughts. Anybody have any other questions or thoughts?
Yes,
Yeah,
Mayor.
I kind of, I agree with what the mayor's saying a lot. Having lived outside of Terrell and been in discussions of possibly being annexed and how that would impact us, and then making the choice from there to move in town and being aware that, our property taxes were going to go up significantly. I think that does help smooth the rough feelings, because when you choose to do something, you accept whatever cost there is a lot better than if you're forced to do something. At the same time, I know that we will never please everybody. We're not going to make everybody happy. There's always going to be somebody somewhere that's going to have something about it that they don't like. We just have to try to do the best we can to make it as smooth for as many people as possible.
Let me add another point too. Excuse me, Councilman. If you'll recall, what we went through in the last annexation, legally speaking, we went through a very rigorous court trial through a county court at law, which we're not successful in. However, when it was appealed to the Dallas Court of Appeals, we totally prevailed to the extent that the Court of Appeals dismissed the entire lawsuit, which was also affirmed by the Texas Supreme Court. Now, we won, but at what price? I guess is what I'm saying. If we can use this as a way of maybe easing the pain of annexation for some, and I understand what the councilwoman's saying here, that there's two sides to the argument. But if we can ease the pain of that, it might tend to lessen the possibility of legal action this time around, at least to the extent that we had the last time around.
As long as we consistent, I think, I don't want the teeter-totter. We're worried about people here, but now we're not. I mean, it just got to be, I guess if we're consistent, I'm okay with that, if we can just be consistent, if that's what we're doing, on
Anyone-
whatever to relieve the whatever.
Anyone else?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Attorney, that's all.
All right, Mayor Ronnie?
Yes, and I want to make sure I understand the process here. So for those that are in the grandfathered areas for annexation, of course, the city has to move forward with certain procedures. One of those is holding a public hearing, so it's every single one of those is going to come through, proposed annexations will come through the council. And then as part of that ordinance, Mike, you're going to, the way this specific ordinance is written is that you're going to attach that agreement that you worked on and the homeowner at that time agreed to. And you're proposing that the agreement will stand in place for a 4-year term, where for the first 2 years, that homeowner does not have to pay the 100% of the city's M&O, maintenance and operations. And then in years 2 and 3, they won't have to pay 60%. And then in the last year.
Can I just clarify that? So you have to refer it like this. They have to pay their taxes. After they pay their taxes, we get proof they paid. Year 1, they get 100% of their maintenance operation portion only. That's the 61 cents of our property taxes. So year 1, it's 100% of M&O. Year 2, it's 100% of M&O. Year 3, it's 60% of M&O. Year 4, it's 30% of M&O. And it's all consistent. It's all the same for everybody, because it's been stated in the ordinance, do it absolutely this way. And so you just always you can't ever say, don't pay it. It's not an abatement. It is a pay it first and then get reimbursed.
So a reimbursement and abatement for them. Thank you for the correction there. And based on, what staff knowledge on potential annexations, How many years do you anticipate the annexations could take? The ones that are, staff may be aware of, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What do we
Well,
anticipate if everything were to go perfect?
I would say that for a growing city, annexation should be a regular habit. I think we did a very good job between 2010 and 2019, just being on a regular annual program of saying, look, we need to look at these pieces of land, make evaluations, see what we can do voluntarily, see what we have to do as a group through the standard annexation process. So we created Ordinance 927 and 928 to grandfather a very large amount of land so that we could just methodically manage that over time. I would tell you that our read on the grandfathering is that under the state law, there isn't a deadline for us to do those annexations. So if I'm saying perfect world, I'm saying it's okay for us to spend the next 10 years methodically going through a series of annexations. Perfect world and reality get broken sometime, and I would say that the break there is we have the anticipation that whenever council may want to move forward on its first round of annexations, we're really likely to have another lawsuit. I'll hope that we won't, and I'll hope that very few people join the lawsuit. Nevertheless, if we do have a lawsuit, it may be that there's a couple of years after our first annexations where we wait for that trial before we pursue additional annexations. So I would say it took something like 3 years to get through the first lawsuit, because you start it, you do appeals, you do everything associated with it, it ends up at the Supreme Court of Texas, and that's just a lengthy period of time. And then even after you win at the Supreme Court, there's waiting to be done where you wait for, different steps to occur in the post-judicial decision process. So while I'm hopeful that we can have a nice methodical 10 years of, hey, we're the fastest growing county in the United States, we're going to grow, we can be methodical and slow over a 10-year period of time, I just think there's going to be bumps in that road.
I also,
There's not a specific timeline because of the amount of, it's not like we have just 3 parcels of land that were grandfathered and we anticipate maybe in the next, hopefully, 5, 10 years they're annexed. The land is much greater than that, so it's hard to put a specific time frame. Because what I notice is that this ordinance does not have an expiration date to it. Some of the ordinance we've done in the past do have an expiration date to where we say, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, that future council gets to, if City Hall finds that this works, wants to bring it back to that future council at that time, then that future council can decide to renew, essentially, right? I'm going to use the word renew the ordinance or even adjust the language to it. I don't know if that's helpful to Council Member Stephanie Holmes Thomas, which mentioned she wants some consistency. And maybe it's not having the agreement, the ordinance, that's consistency, right? But expiration date, in my opinion, would give that future council an opportunity to review whether they want to continue to move forward with.
Let me add something else to what Mike was saying, and I agree with what Mike was saying about that there is a very real possibility that we're going to get sued again if we do this. And let me say this too. Don't let that be, and it hasn't been, and I hope it won't be, in any way a means of having you hesitate about annexation. I say if this is what you think is best for the city, then bow your neck and go. However, given the fact that we went through one round of litigation already and have prevailed, and I mean, we didn't just prevail, we prevailed very convincingly. And that's not going to go without being noticed by our friends down in Kaufman at the bench. Growing up with my dad, who was a judge, an appellate judge on the very court that reversed them, I can tell you that the worst thing a trial judge would fear is being reversed by an appellate court, and that is exactly what happened in this case. And I don't know if we'll get the same judge or not. Whether we do or whether we don't, it's not going to go unnoticed that the last time somebody sued us, they got poured out. And So that's gonna be something to be considered as well.
So also, for the council, we will have a public hearing, and it is open to all the public. You're gonna have people that are coming in that aren't even gonna be annexed. We had that issue last time.
We
But
did.
they have a right to speak, right? So, you may hear from some that aren't being annexed, that are just upset with the city and just gonna come and complain. Just word of caution there. Next item on the agenda? Or did anybody else have anything?
I got one.
Oh, one more, okay.
Mike can probably speak to this. Like, what determines the reimbursement, the M&O versus INS? How was that determined based on?
Well, this is really just the discretion of staff as we talked about it. My comment for you is it's a pretty straightforward process for us to budget for money that goes into our maintenance and operation fund and say, okay, we were going to get $1,000 into maintenance and operations. We can take that money and earmark it and make sure it goes into the pot for the reimbursements. And what we would do budget-wise is I would show up and say, okay, next year let's budget, fill in the dollar amount, 2,000, whatever, 10,000, whatever the dollar amount is that we thought was going to go out in reimbursements. I can very easily put that in the budget, very easily show that to you. I would be concerned for our 15-cent INS side of it, that it becomes much more complicated to say, hey, S&P, Moody's, this is what we're doing with our INS money. Some money's going to come in, but we're not going to spend it on our debt because we have to reimburse these people for it. I just feel like that's a much more difficult ask and a much harder thing for us to do. And my advice to you is let's not include the interest and sinking fund portion in the reimbursement, because I think that's going to create credit issues for us and lots of other administrative difficulties for us. So my suggestion is don't include that 15 cents. And my reminder for everybody is, remember, when you're annexed, you're removed from a 9-cent emergency service district, and you're, under my proposal, adding a 15-cent INS rate. So yes, there's an impact there. Yes, that will impact people. That's 6 cents of an increase, but that's not the same thing as the 61 cents. The 61 cents is the big part of it, and I think this program can be tailored for just that part of it.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. It looked like we would just try to take it from the bigger amount, but,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is item number 9, business items. Greg?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, we bring to you tonight for consideration a resolution of the City Council of the City of Terrell, Texas, calling a general election for the City of Terrell, Texas, to be administered by the Kaufman County Elections Administrator on Saturday, May 6th, 2023, for the purpose of electing a council member for District Number 3 and a council member for District Number 5 for a 3-year term, designating the polling places and filing deadlines, ordering notices of election to be published and posted as prescribed by law in connection with such election, and providing an effective date.
This is our City Secretary, Don Stahl.
Mayor and council, this resolution is basically calling the election on May 6, 2023 for District 3 and District 5 council members. Also, this designates the polling places. They're all listed in the attachment, as well as the early voting dates. It also provides a deadline for an application for a place on the ballot, which is February 17th, 2023 at 5 o'clock p.m.
Okay. Council, does anybody have any questions for Don? Hearing none, is there a motion on resolution number 2057?
Motion to approve resolution number 2057.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Andrea Reese, District 5, a second from Mayrani Velazquez, Mayor Pro Tem District 3, to approve resolution number 2057 as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous vote of those present. I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm telling you, the sugar. Greg?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 9.2, we are to discuss and consider agreement for USIC for 116 line locate services, to be presented by, I believe, Mr. McKeska.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Yes. So Mayor and Council, last week we discussed this item and the need and the purpose behind it. USIC is the largest company across the U.S. that does line locates prior to construction, prior to any kind of digging and repairs, and new pipe installation and so forth. Currently, USIC handles electric, fiber, any kind of telecommunications and so forth. Another consultant, Heath, handles the gas. The City of Terrell's employees are responsible for water and sewer locates. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, that was, it's really a burden. There's probably 250 to 300 locate requests that come in each month. Usually they come in big batches. I mean, you'll get blasted in a day and you may have 30 of them come in. Okay, and then it may be quiet for a couple of days and you get another 30. And you only have 48-hour response time is what you're supposed to locate these. So in order to kind of help take this off the staff, been working with USIC, and these are costs. They're outlined in this memo within the agreement. There are cost escalations over the next few years about fuel and so forth, and if their labor costs increase and things like that, there could be a slight increase in the per locate basis. The very last page of the handout has the cost per ticket that's turned in for locates. So it'll cost us, at a base cost, $12 every time there's a call. And they're already going out, taking care of these other utilities and so forth. And so our recommendation is to authorize the city manager enter into a contract with USIC. This item is funded through the operating budget. There's a line item that was set up in the distribution and then wastewater collection departments, and we would split that cost because they're going to locate both when they go out. So are there any questions?
So, we talked about there's a advantage for us as far as our man-hours and our staffing goes. We don't have to send those out. That's one advantage. What about liability? What if they?
Well, that's a great question, and is one of the questions that I asked them, how do y'all handle these locates, especially in critical facilities? And they said, oh, we work with clients all the time. Anytime we're going to look at a map and have locates, because we're going to provide information to them. And we can have an agreement set up with them that if their locator goes out on site and they're anywhere near, a 12-inch, 20-inch water line, hey, you're going to contact city staff. And we want to look at it. If you have any questions about the information you have, you contact city staff.
How about holding the city harmless on?
There is a clause in the agreement,
Okay.
that they have a responsibility if they mislocate something and there is damage. Now, there is a limit. And Mary Gail reviewed this, made a couple of adjustments. There's a limit on the repair cost. So if something is damaged, they will pay no more than $9,000 per repair, okay? And then there's a cap on an annual basis. And it's kind of a give and take. They're trying to protect themselves. They're also trying to say, hey, look, we own responsibility.
I just want to make sure that we took that under consideration.
Yes,
if we miss
yes,
it.
sir.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Anybody have any new questions for Mike?
This
Keska.
amount, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So this amount will cover, like, all those things on the back pages, just regular?
Yeah, the estimate of 40 to 45,000, it depends on how many locates come in, and depends on whether we've got a lot of emergency calls and so forth after hours or investigations that have to happen. It's hard to pin down exactly because it could vary, but that's my current estimate. It's going to be less than 50,000 a year.
Thank you.
And staff is handling this right now on a large basis on working overtime.
Okay.
Also, I think it's important to note, and I think Mike alluded to it, and Mayor, you were asking about it, as far as liability is concerned, not just on water locates and things, but say that there might be, we had a situation where somebody had got a damage to a vehicle where there was a line locate going on, and who was responsible for that? They tried to say the city, well, no, we weren't, and that takes care of it in this agreement as well.
True.
All right, so, council, what is your pleasure on this USIC agreement? Is there a motion?
Did you make a motion?
And we're making a motion to authorize the city manager to go into contract with ISIC. That's how we phrase it?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, Mayor, I make a motion to authorize the city manager to enter into contract with ISIC.
USIC.
USIC.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion from Grady Simpson, District 2, a second from Andrea Reese, District 5, to enter into agreement with USIC and to authorize the city manager to do so. Is there any further discussion?
It's in the contract.
All those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous vote of those present. Our next item on the agenda is 9.3.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, item 9.3 is for us to discuss and consider a construction plat for Vlac Addition Lots 1 and 2, Block 1 being 11.377 acres out of the W.E. Sullivan Survey, abstract number 490, City of Terrell, ETJ, Kaufman County, Texas, also known as 15457, State Highway 205, CP 23-001.
All right, Mr. Rogers, go ahead.
You know, back when, in, 2003, we were talking about that earlier, back in the day, we used to use paper like this at every council meeting. We didn't have all these TVs and screens and stuff, so this is kind of going back a little bit. This feels kind of good to have paper in front of you here. We have a construction plat for the Volk Addition. It's out on State Highway 205. It's right at the edge of the city limits. And it is about a little over 11 acres. It's splitting it into two lots, about 9 acres and about 2 acres. And so if you'll, leave it there for just a second, please. So Griffith is just off the map here. And so this is out there across. There's one storage unit place out there next to that vet clinic. If you know about where that's at, right there, trying to get you orientated on this. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. This is the construction plat document. They are building storage units in here. This is the fire lane that traverses through there. Being in the ETJ, we have no zoning authority, only platting authority, and we've coordinated our efforts with County Fire Marshal quite well on this and the developer, and this passed P&Z at their last meeting with a 5-0 vote. If you'll go one more slide. So the driveway there on the right-hand side, that's State Highway 205. And they'll have one driveway in, and then their fire lane will traverse all the way through the site. And so that big white area in the front is a big building that's quite large. That's going to be climate controlled. That's going to have storage units in it. And then back behind it, you see all the long, skinny buildings. That's your typical storage unit building in the back there. That have the small 10, 12-foot wide units for that. And so staff recommends approval of the Volk Addition. Be happy to answer any questions.
And that's a 5-0 vote by
P&Z. Yes, sir.
All right. Anybody have any questions?
Steve, can you remind, because this request is in the ETJ, which we don't have zoning authority, just platting, so we can only base our decision on platting rules, not whether we want it next to a home or not next to a home. Is that?
Now, we have no zoning authority in the ETJ at all, Councilwoman. Platting, it's platting and subdivisions are the only things we can actually do, and we do that through an interlocal agreement from the county that is, excuse me, giving us their authority to do that in our ETJ. That's an existing interlocal agreement that we have with them.
Okay.
So, for instance, on this, if you'll go back to the plat document, I'm sorry, right there. So we can require fire lanes, because that's in our subdivision ordinance. And so we can require fire lanes for our fire truck to drive through this. However, it gets a little complicated. We can't require them to put masonry or stone because that's in our zoning ordinance. We can't apply that to this. So it'll all be metal buildings more than likely, because that's what they do in the ETJ. Kind of, you understand the split there of response. So we did coordinate our efforts with the county on this as well. We haven't had a lot of these, but in this instance here, we contacted the county fire marshals. We had our fire marshal and their fire marshal work together on this, because our interlocal agreement with the county actually requires the county to implement their fire code in this area, but we plat it. And so there's some overlap and coordination that needs to occur there. And so they work quite well with us at the county. We appreciate their coordination on this.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Motion to, on resolution, no, is this a construction plat?
Construction plan.
Yeah. Is there a motion on 9.3?
Motion to approve item 9.3, construction plat.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Andrew Reese, District 5, a second from Grady Simpson, District 2, to approve the plat as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous vote of those present. Our next item on the agenda is consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we bring to you tonight, on second reading, a resolution number 2056, a resolution authorizing continued participation with the steering committee of cities served by Encore, and authorizing the payment of 10 cents per capita to the steering committee to fund regulatory and legal proceedings and activities related to Encore Electric Delivery Company, LLC. This comes to you tonight on second reading.
Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
Have a motion, a second?
Second.
We have a motion from Andrew Reese, District 5, a second from Grady Simpson, District 2, to approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, let it be known by stating aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries with unanimous vote of those present. Next item on the agenda is to receive Star Transit ridership report. We'll just get that to, we'll just get that to you. If you have any questions, reach out to Mr. Sims. Our next item on the agenda is adjourned into executive session in accordance with Section 551 of the Texas Government Code to discuss the following. Section 551.072, deliberation regarding real property. Section 551.074, personnel matters. Section 551.087, deliberations regarding economic development negotiations. We are now in executive session.
More to come next week, so that's all right. You like the abbreviated version, right? Yeah, I gotta think of.
We're going to reconvene into regular session and consider action, if any, on items discussed in executive session. Does anybody have any motions? Hearing none, we are adjourned.
Enjoyed everybody for the Coffin County weekend. I really think it brings council.
Enjoyed the Round Rock Library.
Yep.
I did, it was nice, very nice.
Well, how you guys compare it to the